Перезарядка! Огонь не прекращать! Приближается!
Black smoke billowed from the coastal command center when the first volley from Russian close-range artillery struck the Defense Operations Center. Not a single warning signal was sent. America's entire electronic network was neutralized in minutes. From the horizon, waves of amphibious assault ships pushed into the shallows, followed by transport helicopters packed with Marines. The invasion was organized with cold, ruthless precision, no errors, no gaps for reaction. The American garrison consisted of only a few dozen soldiers. Their main weapons were mortars and light anti-tank guns. They managed to turn their artillery toward the sea, firing back in desperation. One round struck the hull of the first landing craft, but it wasn't enough to stop the formation barreling toward the shore. Amphibious armored vehicles dropped their ramps. Russian troops swarmed the sand, splitting into 3 assault columns, methodically approaching each fortification. Above attack, helicopters continuously strafed the archipelago, launching air-to-ground missiles at the remaining pockets of resistance. The westernmost American defensive position was annihilated in the first bombardment. Surviving soldiers fell back to the operations building to organize a defense. Ammunition dwindled. Communications were heavily jammed. The radar system went dark. In an instant, the entire island was completely isolated. From deeper waters, 2 Russian destroyers launched cruise missiles, targeting the landing zone and the mountainside radar station. The second explosion tore the roof from the command center. A group of wounded American soldiers was dragged out on stretchers, while the rest continued to fire from behind collapsed walls. There was no order to retreat, no reinforcements. They knew they had been abandoned, but they fought to the last bullet. An assault group from the island's east flank suddenly advanced. Russian troops carrying specialized breaching tools cleared every bunker, every captured building. The Russian flag was raised over the communications tower after just a few hours. The entire American defense unit was subdued. Most were captured, some vanished in the rubble. The resistance ended in silence, leaving only smoke dust and the thick smell of cordite hanging over the sea. Meanwhile, offshore, an American patrol ship on a resupply run detected abnormal radar signals. Before it could approach it, was warned to leave the area. All signals from the island were completely cut. The commanding officers couldn't believe what the tactical map displayed. The entire defense cluster was gone. A naval officer gripped the helm, ordering his ship forward regardless. But as the vessel closed to within 5 nautical miles of the shore, an anti-ship missile screamed toward it. The warhead struck the hull. The ship listed to one side, erupting in smoke and flames. Only then did the national surveillance system confirm the situation. The strategic Hawaiian island had fallen to Russia. Satellite images showed a line of Russian logistics vessels filing into the bay, unloading construction materials, radar equipment, and anti-aircraft artillery. A temporary runway was erected right on the beach, marking the beginning of a permanent occupation if there was no immediate response. The situation had tipped decidedly in Moscow's favor. America had not yet grasped what it had lost before Russia had already erected. Fences planted its flag, established a military zone, and issued warnings across the sea. The protests from Washington rang hollow compared to the speed of action on the ground. The battle lasted only a morning, but was enough to change the regional security map. As soon as it was confirmed that Hawaii had been captured, the U.S. Joint Chiefs immediately issued a counterattack order. All available warships were mobilized. The destroyer USS John Paul Jones led the formation, followed by 3 fast attack patrol boats and 2 small missile craft. In the air, a squadron of F, divided by A-18 seconds, scrambled from the mainland, flying straight west, fully loaded with guided bombs and air-to-ground missiles. The entire war machine was activated with no second option: retake the island or lose national honor. The American naval formation approached the contested waters under constant radar jamming. Unidentified red dots flooded the command screen. The navigation officer ordered battle readiness while still over 10 nautical miles out. Russian warships emerged from multiple directions, at least 4 destroyers and 2 frigates armed with cruise missiles. They formed a pincer formation, closing the net on the American force. No warnings, no negotiations. Russia's long-range artillery fired first. The first 2 shells landed near the John Paul Jones, damaging its primary radar. The American ships returned fire with their 76mm cannons, but their shorter range meant most shells splashed harmlessly. The F, divided by 18 seconds, dove low, launching air-to-ground missiles at the Russian cluster. A Russian frigate was hit at stern, erupting in flames. A brief cheer in the American command room was instantly silenced as 2 anti-ship missiles screamed in from the east. Fast attack boat 119 was hit midship. Its entire superstructure collapsed into the sea. Another boat attempting a rescue was hit by shrapnel and caught fire. In minutes, the American formation was shattered. The urgent command was broadcast: do not retreat, continue the attack. The remaining ships formed a line, firing directly at the enemy fleet, maneuvering to dodge incoming fire. Many hits landed, but the difference in firepower was too great. In the sky, the U.S. air power fought to regain the advantage. The F, divided by A-18 seconds, attacked in waves, striking the landing zones Russia was establishing. A guided bomb hit a temporary fuel depot, creating a massive fireball. However, the enemy immediately responded with medium-range bombers flying from Vladivostok, launching a volley of air-to-air missiles into the combat zone. 2F divided by 18 seconds were down, the pilots ejected into the sea. Rescue forces could not approach the blockaded area. The Russian destroyers pressed their advantage using their superior radar and long-range missiles to control the entire area. The American command ship, seeing its retreat cut off, switched to breakthrough mode. The three remaining ships accelerated simultaneously, launching their entire missile reserves into the enemy's center. A series of explosions followed. A Russian ship was heavily damaged, but at the same time, an American missile boat was sunk. Smoke, oil, and metal debris covered the sea. Communications between ships were almost completely severed, reduced to a few intermittent radio channels. The American fleet was decimated, but had not yet been ordered to stop fighting. In the command room, officers watched in silence as the map shrank as radar registered each ship going dark. The first counterattack was a total tactical failure, but the fighting spirit of the American servicemen had captured the region's attention. As the sun climbed high, the Russian forces began pulling back to defensive positions around the island, maintaining control. The USS John Paul Jones turned its bow and retreated to preserve what was left of its force. Its deck was still smoking. No one spoke. They knew this defeat was only temporary. The wounded were taken below deck, while the American flag, torn and scorched, still flew from the mast. Back home, national television ran urgent reports on the failed counterattack. Public opinion was inflamed. Protests erupted in Washington, demanding a full-scale campaign. The Department of Defense was forced to issue a statement affirming that America had not lost and would never surrender. But on the ground, the reality was far harsher. The entire forward fleet was crippled, the air wing weakened, and Hawaii remained in Russian hands. Immediately following the fleet's failure, the U.S. Joint Chiefs decided to launch a recovery operation at all costs. Elite special forces and Marines were ordered to approach the island in secret without major naval support. They would rely on disguised civilian transports approaching in the gaps between Russian patrols. On deck, the soldiers checked their magazines, wiping salt spray from their faces. They knew the chances of returning were near zero, but the orders were clear: take back the island even if only one man survived. As the sun rose high, the American Special Forces team split into three prongs. From the west, the first group navigated through the coral reefs, moving silently ashore. They encountered a Russian sentry post sooner than expected and were forced to open fire. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, but was enough to shatter the element of surprise. Immediately, close-range artillery from the island fired wildly into the sea. The remaining landing boats were hit before they could pull back, smoke rising in plumes. The second group managed to reach the southern shore using breaching charges to open a path into the coastal fortifications. Explosions ripped along the rock face, sending earth and sand flying. From a distance, Russian radar detected the movement and immediately called in artillery from the island's center. The volley tore through the coastal forest, hitting many American soldiers with shrapnel. The rest pushed forward. They used a shoulder-fired missile to take down a transport helicopter, dropping reinforcements. The aircraft burst into flames and crashed into a nearby swamp. In the sky, black smoke drew a long spiral, the first proof that America still had the power to resist. The battle turned the island into a labyrinth of smoke and fire. The American teams captured a fuel depot and a small comm station, destroying all the equipment. Another group captured the helicopter landing pad, raising a temporary flag before being hit by a fierce counterattack. The Russians quickly deployed 2 more Marine companies supported by naval gunfire from offshore. Each counterpulse made the ground shake. Palm trees snapped and fell, and sand and dust filled the air. Meanwhile, at sea, the American command ship tried to move closer to provide fire support, but was held back by the enemy's long-range artillery. A shell struck the bow, damaging the controls. The ship was forced to pull back, leaving the landing force to fend for itself. Despite losing contact, the teams continued to hold, breaking into small fire teams, fighting close quarters with grenades and sidearms. Every foot gained was paid for in blood on the hot sand. By midday, Russia sent medium-range bombers from their northern bases. A string of bombs hit the seaside building where the American Spec Ops team was taking cover. Part of the unit was wiped out, but the survivors used the smoke and dust to move deeper. They destroyed 2 more ammo dumps and a radar station, causing significant damage to the island's defenses. However, Russia's superiority in numbers and equipment gradually overwhelmed them. The battle raged through the afternoon. Both sides were exhausted, but neither would retreat. A group of American soldiers holed up in a concrete bunker was surrounded. They used their last rounds to hold off the enemy. As the gunfire faded, they knew they were trapped. A short message was broadcast to command. We have completed the mission. Enemy has sustained heavy losses, still fighting. The signal went dead. The raid did not recapture the island, but it had slowed Russia's fortification progress. The radar installations were destroyed and fuel burned for hours, forcing the enemy to call for more aid from logistics ships. Dozens of American soldiers were killed. The survivors who made it back to the sea were less than a third of the original force. Though a tactical failure, their spirit forced the entire region to change its view of American resistance. After the bloody counterattack, Russia shifted to a phase of absolute control. The entire sea around Hawaii was declared a no-go military zone. A fleet of destroyers, frigates, and Coast Guard vessels formed a perimeter tens of nautical miles wide, blockading all supply routes. In the sky, reconnaissance and AWACS planes flew in constant rotation. Any object emitting a radio signal was identified, locked, and warned it would be shot down. America attempted to break the blockade with transport ships disguised as fishing vessels carrying food, fresh water, and medicine for the group of soldiers still holding out in the southern part of the island. However, the plan was discovered. A small logistics boat was intercepted, its crew forced to dump their cargo into the sea. Crates of rations and barrels of oil drifted on the water. The sight made the American commanders bite their lips in silent fury. Russia quickly erected temporary radar stations installing close-range artillery and anti-aircraft missile launchers along the coast. From space, international satellites recorded the astonishing construction speed. Concrete blocks, antenna masts, and makeshift runways sprang up from the sea. A complete military base was formed in hours, enough to shield it from any attack. Back in Washington, the remaining forces were thrown into a rescue plan. Generals met continuously at the Pentagon debating the feasibility of another operation. Recon data showed the Russians had brought in at least 2 more Marine battalions, along with armored vehicles and attack helicopters. The balance of power had tipped completely, but to retreat meant losing Hawaii forever, an unacceptable choice. On the island, the trapped American soldiers were running out of food and ammunition. They rationed meals, digging temporary wells for rainwater. By day, naval gunfire from offshore constantly shelled the forest where they were hiding. The ground temperature soared. Steam rising from the wet sand made the trenches feel like ovens. Though exhausted, they kept their radio active, broadcasting a locator signal every hour. Washington could only hear static interspersed with brief, broken messages. We are still alive. At sea, an American patrol boat tried to get close to recover wounded from the previous fight. As it closed to 8 nautical miles, the missile warning system blared. The commander ordered a hard turn, but it was too late. The anti-ship missile tore through the hull and the entire ship exploded. Survivors were picked up by rescue craft, most suffering from severe burns and hearing loss. The footage was sent back to the Joint Chiefs, shaking the entire military. Russia wasn't stopping at a blockade. They deployed AWACS, controlled the airspace, and issued an international warning: any military activity within a 50 nautical mile radius would be considered an act of provocation. Neighboring countries fell silent. America stood alone inside the tightening blockade. Within the government, debates raged. One faction called for Allied aid, another wanted to remain quiet to avoid escalation. But when images of the starving besieged soldiers still flying the American flag on the hilltop were broadcast internationally, public pressure exploded. People took to the streets demanding action. Many nations expressed support, but no one had the power to intervene. The Secretary of Defense finally sent a formal dispatch to the White House activating the nation's full defense protocol. The news spread, and Moscow immediately reinforced its firepower, showing they had anticipated this reaction. The blockade was complete, but it also opened a new phase where the major players would show their hands. The skies over the eastern Pacific shook as a massive formation of U.S. military transport aircraft appeared on radar. On the sea, the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group entered deep water, followed by destroyers with Aegis control systems and Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines. The arrival of the U.S. fleet needed no announcement. Its sound and massive shadow were enough to signal that the game had changed. At the command center in Washington, American officers couldn't believe their eyes as the satellite feed showed the entire U.S. fleet deploying. The Pentagon had made its decision, treating any military action against its sovereign territory as an act of war. Moscow's entire command system went to high alert. Russian warships were ordered to tighten formation, ready for confrontation. From the deck of a USS Ronald Reagan F, divided by A-18E, Super Hornets were lined up. F-35 stealth fighters took off in pairs, flying low over the sea toward the occupied island. Behind them, P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance planes circled, gathering electronic signals, identifying radar locations and Russian missile batteries. Not a shot was fired, but the battlefield was heavy with tension. The Russian fleet reacted immediately. 4 destroyers moved to cut across the carrier's path, while 2 frigates veered south in a flanking maneuver. Their targeting radars lit up, sweeping across the American formation. The atmosphere was so tense that a single mistake could trigger a catastrophe. The U.S. command issued the order, "Do not fire first," but simultaneously brought all systems to maximum combat readiness. Close-in weapon systems, CIWS, were activated. Air defense missiles were ready on their launchers. In the Command Information Center, officers tracked every moving light on their screens. Each movement could be the start of a global-scale war. Russia did not back down. They deployed more AWACS and medium-range bombers, flying at low altitudes in a show of force. Some even skirted the edge of the American air defense identification zone, forcing U.S. jets to scramble and intercept. In the dense air of the standoff, every action was a message. To affirm its position, the United States organized a large-scale naval exercise just off the coast. Warships moved in sync, firing at simulated targets. Fighter jets practiced intercept tactics. Every shell fired, every maneuver was a declaration that this sea did not belong to any single power. The international media immediately called it the strongest signal of deterrence since the Cold War. On the island, Russian forces maintained their defensive positions, but the psychological pressure was visibly mounting. They were under strict orders not to fire on any U.S. unit, even if provoked. However, at the outer perimeter, some of their small patrol boats still darted toward the American formation, painting them with targeting radar before pulling away a dangerous game that could ignite a clash. The U.S. knew a small error could turn this sea into a global flashpoint. But Washington had not come merely to issue warnings. Along with the naval force, the U.S. deployed a THAAD high-altitude anti-missile system at a nearby base and positioned new surveillance radars. A squadron of F-15 seconds was dispatched to protect the airspace, coordinating with local F-22 seconds. As sunset approached, the western sky lit up with the reflections from hundreds of signal lights on the ships. U.S. pilots stood by their aircraft, ready for the order. At sea, the warships of both nations maintained their distance, but every cannon was aimed and ready. Not a sound, but war was at the doorstep. Before the sun was high, the skies over the Pacific were streaked with contrails. American fighter jets launched simultaneously from air bases, and the USS Ronald Reagan opening the campaign to liberate the island. On deck, technicians ran along the flight line, navigation lights flashing. The entire combat system was activated, and within minutes, the sky had become a battlefield of speed and fire. The F-35 seconds led flying low to evade enemy radar, then suddenly rocketing upward, launching air-to-ground missiles at the Russian radar positions on the island. Above them, F-15 seconds held a protective formation ready to engage any interceptors. From the south, 2 F-22 Raptors screamed and targeting the coastal artillery Russia had just set up. A volley of guided bombs hit a fuel depot, creating a massive black column of smoke that covered half the island. Russia reacted instantly. From their bases on the island medium-range surface to air missile SAM launchers opened fire, creating a dense curtain of fire. An F-35 was hit by shrapnel and forced to return to the carrier, but most of the missiles were defeated by jammers and active defense systems. The Russian Air Force threw its Su-35 and Su-57 squadrons from bases near Vladivostok into the fray, determined to stop the assault. The two sides met at 2,600 feet, turning the sky into a deadly maze. The dogfight began at speeds beyond visual range. Air-to-air missiles left their rails before pilots could even hear the warning tones. U.S. F-15 seconds flying high used their multi-directional radar to lock targets from afar, while F-35 seconds weaved below, attacking from blind spots. An Su-57 was hit, caught fire, and fell into the sea. But immediately after, an American F, divided by A-18, was also taken down by an enemy missile, crashing just a few miles from the island. While the air war raged, the U.S. fleet below opened up with long-range artillery support. Shells landed with precision on coastal fortifications, destroying part of the Russian defense system. AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters from the USS America amphibious assault ship moved in, firing volleys of low-altitude cruise missiles that swept the coastline. The entire northern defensive line collapsed, creating an opening for the landing force, now waiting for the signal. Russia's Air Force tried to regain the initiative. Two Su-35 seconds flying low attacked the F-35 formation directly, but were countered by the stealth fighters. An air-to-air missile slammed into the tail of the first. The second escaped only to be locked and destroyed by the Aegis system of a U.S. destroyer. The entire sky was alight with red explosions like stars falling in daylight. By midday, the advantage had shifted to the U.S. alliance. Most of the radar and command stations on the island were destroyed. The artillery batteries were cut off. Russia was forced to pull its bombers from the area, leaving only fighters for defense on the sea. U.S. destroyers launched a volley of long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles, striking fortified positions deep within the island. The continuous explosions made the ground tremble, sending up clouds of dust. An American Special Forces unit waiting for the signal to land watched from a distance. Through binoculars, they saw the Russian flag on the main base torn to shreds in an explosion. The commander lowered his binoculars and said softly, "It's our time." The green light was given. Offshore on the carrier deck, U.S. pilots continued to launch. The line of jets taking off was endless, each carrying smart bombs or ground attack missiles. The second wave targeted the logistics and the temporary port Russia had built. A direct hit on a reserve fuel depot sent flames dozens of meters into the air, staining the sky red. As the sun hit its peak, the first phase of the air campaign ended. The Allied Air Force controlled the entire airspace around the island. Below, the landing craft began to move, carrying thousands of U.S. Marines. The order came over the radio, crisp and clear: all forces advance. As the sun began to set, the landing force entered the shallows. The USS America opened its bow, and one by one, amphibious assault vehicles, AAVs, slid into the sea, racing for the shore. In the air, F-35 seconds and F divided by A-18 seconds continued to circle, ready to strike any target threatening the advance. The sea was calm, but no one was fooled. They knew that in seconds, hell would be unleashed. And it was. When the AAVs were less than 2 nautical miles from shore, Russia's remaining coastal artillery opened up. Columns of water erupted around the convoy. An AAV was hit and capsized, sending Marines into the water. The vehicles behind didn't stop. They pushed on using smoke screens and close-range fire from the motherships to clear a path. The island's air defenses fired relentlessly, but were eliminated one by the F-35 seconds above. The landing beach became a flickering landscape of fire and explosions. The first wave of U.S. Marines hit the beach. They jumped from the vehicles, running and shooting. Bullets tore up the sand. Smoke was everywhere. They quickly secured a narrow beachhead, setting up a temporary perimeter to open a path for the next wave. One platoon was pinned down on a southern hill where Russian troops were dug into concrete bunkers. The firefight was long. Every foot gained was paid for in casualties. On the northern side of the island, U.S. Army Rangers opened a second front. They used robotic deminers to clear a path, then swarmed ashore with terrifying speed. Fire support from the destroyers offshore continuously swept the fortifications. The Russian defenders fought back, fiercely firing from bunkers and deep entrenchments. Some positions only went silent after a direct hit from a guided bomb. The sound of guns, explosions, and white smoke merged into a thick fog that covered the entire beach. As the first forces pushed, deeper communications began to fail due to enemy jamming. A group of Marines was separated from their unit, forced to take cover in a smoldering palm grove. They were surrounded out of ammo, but held their position for hours until a Special Forces unit found them. 2 were alive. The rest lay on the sand. There was no time to mourn. The only order was, keep moving forward. By mid-afternoon, the assault groups converged on the island's center. The Russian forces had consolidated at their main base where the command post and ammo depot were located. The Allied force decided to end it. U.S. forces split into 3 groups, coordinating with the Marines to surround the base. Artillery and smart bombs rained down. A massive explosion tore apart the central building, creating a crater dozens of meters deep. When the smoke cleared, the survivors inside still tried to fire back, but were completely overwhelmed. Late in the afternoon, the Russian flag was lowered in silence. A final group of their soldiers, holed up in an underground tunnel, refused to surrender. U.S. Special Forces had to use tear gas and flashbangs to end the fight without further major casualties. After hours of combat, the American flag was handed to a young commander who had lost nearly half his unit that day. He climbed to the top of the remaining building, planting the torn flag amidst the smoke and wind. Below, soldiers from both services looked up. No one spoke. They all understood this victory came not from weapons, but from the will of those who refused to be defeated. On the aircraft carrier, the victory report was relayed to Washington. But in the field hospital, the stretchers were full. Many were seriously wounded, their faces still caked with sand and salt. There was no cheering, only the heavy silence of those who had just survived hell. Just as the Allied force completed its control of the island, early warning systems on the U.S. destroyers detected massive missile launches from mainland Russia. The data feed lit up bright red. The number of launches exceeded all predictions. The Pentagon immediately ordered all defense systems activated. On the ships, officers scrambled to their stations as the Aegis radar swept the sky. On the screen, the bright dots moved at terrifying speed, heading straight for Hawaii. The counterattack everyone knew would come had arrived. The first medium-range ballistic missile crossed the sky just minutes later. The USS Benfold fired its interceptors, launching 10 consecutive anti-air missiles. In the sky, a chain of explosions lit up the night like a string of thunder. Many warheads were destroyed in midair, but a few managed to get through the net. One of them struck the logistical area on the east side of the island, destroying the fuel depot and severely damaging the field hospital. A concrete wall collapsed, wounding many soldiers. Washington immediately sent a warning to Moscow, demanding an end to all military action or risk, pushing the situation beyond all control. Russia did not respond. Instead, they launched another wave of missiles, this time at the sea, where the U.S. fleet was operating as a warning. An American supply ship was hit by shrapnel, caught fire, and had to be abandoned. The flames reflected on the water like a long gash in a dark mirror. In the temporary base on the island, U.S. commanders held an emergency meeting. Amidst maps covered in red, the decision was made: do not counter-launch, escalate defense only. A direct retaliation could trigger a total war, which no one wanted. Instead, all radar systems were set to maximum alert. All patrol aircraft were ordered to fly 24/7. At the same time, US B-1B Lancer bombers took off from Guam, flying just outside the air defense identification zone, sending a clear message. If Russia continued its attack, the response would be immediate. Moscow remained silent. But satellite images showed dozens of mobile missile launchers still being moved south. The pressure spread across the region. Japan, South Korea, and Australia all convened emergency security meetings. The Pacific had become the epicenter of a geopolitical storm. On the island, U.S. soldiers and engineers dug in, reinforcing their positions. The wounded were airlifted to the carrier for treatment. Small convoys moved continuously, transporting ammo and supplies. No one dared say it, but everyone knew if one more wave of missiles got through, they might not hold. As night fell, radar detected another group of contacts. This time, it was a formation of Russian bombers approaching the edge of the airspace. F-15 seconds and F-22 seconds immediately scrambled, forming an intercept line. No shots were fired, but they were a hair's breadth away from contact. Both sides knew a single stray bullet could set the entire region on fire. Washington sent one last message, stressing that the U.S. would defend its territory to the end, but was not seeking war. However, the U.S. Pacific Command still ordered more attack submarines and 2 other carrier groups to the region, a necessary precaution. The massive military presence made the sea seem to freeze. Near dawn, the missile launch signals stopped abruptly. Russia announced it had completed its warning mission and demanded U.S. forces withdraw. Neither side backed down. The warships still faced each other, only a few nautical miles apart. Their cannons still aimed. As the smoke from the last explosions faded the sea around, Hawaii returned to a strange calm. There were no victory declarations, no celebrations. Only the burned-out hulks of ships drifting offshore and the lingering smoke over the recaptured island. The one-day war was over, but no one believed peace had returned. On the USS Ronald Reagan, the damage report was read in a hoarse voice. 7 pilots missing, 2 F-35 seconds not returned, 1 destroyer heavily damaged. The losses were heavy, with nearly 100 soldiers killed and many more wounded. But with the American flag still flying over the island, no one spoke of defeat. For them, just holding that small piece of land was proof of their unbreakable spirit. Washington and Moscow issued statements at almost the same time. Both claimed to have achieved their tactical objectives and would continue to monitor the situation. No apologies, no admission of error. The world understood this was just a pause, a necessary step back before larger calculations began. At the United Nations, an emergency meeting lasted for hours but produced no resolution. The Asian nations were split, some offered support, others dared only remain silent. No one wanted to be the next piece in the confrontation between the 2 superpowers. On the island, U.S. Army engineers began reinforcing the base. They rebuilt the runway-constructed bunkers and deployed long-range radar. A joint command center was established both to defend the island and to send a message this position would never be taken easily again. Along the shore, the wreckage of landing craft and broken artillery was pulled up as a memorial. In Moscow, state media broadcast images of soldiers withdrawing according to tactical plan while reaffirming indisputable sovereignty. Editorials spoke of restraint and diplomatic victory, though the reality was that the Russian Navy had been forced to leave the island under pressure from the U.S. encirclement. Outwardly calm, but inwardly no one could hide the bitterness the Blitzkrieg operation had backfired. Meanwhile, Washington's position had changed completely. The U.S. government signed a series of new military cooperation agreements, receiving new coastal defense systems, surveillance radar, and modern reconnaissance aircraft. Congress approved a record increase in the defense budget. Military academies opened new training courses, and the public saw the war as a new milestone the day their nation forced the world to listen. The seas around Hawaii became the front line of the new regional defense. U.S., Japanese, and Australian warships rotated patrols. Every appearance carried a message of deterrence. The regional order cannot be overturned by force. The Southeast Asian nations, once fearful now, began to accelerate their own military modernization, reestablishing a new balance. An era of strategic competition had quietly begun. In the temporary command post on the island, the young U.S. commander sat looking at the map. The red dots were gone, replaced by the symbols of allies. He didn't smile. On the horizon, the sea still held a faint, ambiguous light where radar had just detected a Russian naval formation moving on the far rim, a reminder that the war was not really over. As night fell, the island was lit by hundreds of defensive flares. The American flag whipped in the sea breeze. Beside it, another Allied flag was hung no higher, no lower, a symbol of an alliance reborn in blood. No one knew what tomorrow would bring. Maybe peace would last a few months or maybe just a few hours. But for the soldiers who lay on the sand, that answer no longer mattered. They had completed their mission, proving that in a world of calculations and power, there still existed a nation willing to stand tall in the storm. And on the quiet sea, the shadows of ships slowly reappeared. The line between peace and war was as fragile as the moonlight on the water.